On the topic of rationality, let's switch to what's going on with Israel today. Do you have a standard answer about what your explanation is for the double standard that is applied to Israel? If you, and I'm pretty sure I've heard you talk about this, there is a double. I think you agree there's a double standard. What do you think the prime motivation or motivations are for it?
You know, I must admit I'm a little confused about its origins. I mean, I think there are at least two variables, and it's in any given case, I'm not sure which is the most operative. I mean, one is just frank anti-Semitism, and there's more anti-Semitism in the world than I realized prior to October 7th. However, I think it's probably not causal in most of the cases that I think you and I have found most galling. I mean, when you look at what's happened at our most elite institutions, if we're going to walk through the quad of Columbia or Harvard or Stanford and start asking students why they're effectively supporting Hamas, even though they wouldn't tend to think of it that way, I don't think the answer, even if we drilled down on it, is anti-Semitism, generally speaking, of a sort that we have been wise to worry about it historically. Although there is some of that there. I think it's more this oppressor-oppressed framing that has been mapped onto everything, and by which Jews and Israel seem to always fall on the side of the oppressor dichotomy, right? So I think you would see something similar. I mean, it would be worse. It's hard to explain the behavior of the UN and certainly the influence that Islamist apologists have had over there without resorting to anti-Semitism to some degree. I mean, the stature of Israel as the Jew among nations, I think, requires the concept of anti-Semitism to fully understand. But generally speaking, I think any Western society in a similar situation to Israel's would be castigated in the same crazy way by the left at this moment in history as the oppressor, even if they were responding to an attack of the sort we saw on October 7th. I mean, you saw the rudiments of this in the way certain deranged liberals or pseudo-liberals responded to the Charlie Hebdo massacre in France, or any other kind of a similar jihadist atrocity that's happened in the UK. There were reactions to 9/11 that had this character. Right, so this species of moral confusion appears even when Israel and the Jews are just not involved at all. But it's worse once you add Israel and the Jews.
Yes, I want to try out a theory on you. I'm very curious to see what you think about it. I've long thought that the West, and America in particular, has what you might call an autoimmune disease. When you have an autoimmune disease, your body attacks healthy organs and healthy structures because there's nothing foreign to attack, and you get this hyper kind of eating yourself almost dynamic. And I think that there is this tendency, it helps explain. I agree with you that it's the hatred of Israel is kind of overdetermined for a bunch of different reasons, but you see this. I think it's one of the great examples of horseshoe theory right now, which I've changed my mind about. I used to reject horseshoe theory, and I no longer do. Insofar as on the right and on the left, you have this sustained effort of attacking existing healthy institutions as illegitimate, as rigged, as corrupt, as sort of a conspiracy against a specific group. You have, everyone likes to talk about, a lot of people in my universe like to talk about critical race theory, and I have my problems with critical race theory. But on the right, you have all of this, what I've called critical Trump theory, which is that if any institution or individual, for whatever reason, is critical of Trump, it must mean that they're anti-Trump, that they're biased or bigoted against Trump, which is when Bill Barr told Trump that there was no evidence that the election was stolen, Trump's response was, "You must hate Trump," right? It wasn't like what did you look into this or did you look into that? It's like
Yeah.
the heuristic is if it's against me, it's bad. That is basically the logic of a lot of the critical race stuff, which is that if a disparate outcome reflects poorly on a specific race, it must be proof of some bias, some ghost in the machine that is doing something wrong. And I think that sort of thinking, that sort of iconoclasm, which causes people to attack any sort of healthy institution or principle as inherently corrupt, is part of the. It's a subroutine in our culture that is yielding all sorts of perverse outcomes. And I think the Jews fall into this in a certain way because Jews disproportionately do well. Israel disproportionately prospers and is democratic, which makes it look bad for its neighbors. And so it must be that the Jews are doing something wrong or unfair or sinister. And I find that whenever I see this sort of weird attack on existing institutions that are supposed to be doing their job, part of it seems to be this sort of addiction to transgression, addiction to the idea that we're in a resistance. No one wants to actually be a responsible party and run an institution. Everyone wants to be on the outside of an institution, throwing bricks at it and claiming that they're part of the rebel alliance. And this sort of cultural, psychological impulse is just all over the place. And I think Israel is one of these places that's at the bleeding edge of it for a bunch of different reasons.
Yeah, well, I think the autoimmune analogy is very interesting and captures a lot of this. I mean, there's an irony here, which I know others have pointed out. Actually, Yuval Noah Harari points this out in his new book, Nexus, that you have all these populists who think that all of our institutions are rotten and corrupt, and by definition, no one can be trusted, and yet they're willing to place their trust in specific individuals like Alex Jones or Donald Trump or pick your crank, as though as though that made any sense, right? I mean, yeah. I mean, we want institutions that can self-correct, and there's a tension between self-correction and the preservation of legacy code that is good, right? We should be conservatively biased, I think, in certain regards. We shouldn't. I mean, it's almost like the design of an airplane, right? Like who wants to be the first passenger on an airplane that is designed by principles that have nothing to do with the principles that caused previous airplanes to successfully fly, right? We've changed everything, now come aboard, right? No, nobody wants that. I mean, you want to know that changes have been incremental and judicious, and you've conserved everything that worked previously. So this current appetite to tear everything down, which paradoxically is expressed by some people who stand at the top of the hierarchy of elites, right? I mean, you've got these fake populists from Elon Musk on down who are organizing their various personality cults on social media. Frankly, social media and alternative media, podcasts like ours, but not specifically ours, hopefully, are part of this problem, right? I mean, it's like when I see what gets said on a podcast about epidemic diseases or the integrity of various presidential candidates, it's whether our elections are fair, etc. It's so irresponsible. I mean, given the sizes of these audiences, right, and people just flip on the mics and just freestyle, and they can't figure out what's wrong with Tucker Carlson or what's wrong with RFK Jr. Everything just has to be turned over. The turtles you mentioned before just have to be turned over with an open mind, and let's revisit the Holocaust, and let's revisit vaccines, and it's madness, right? But the crucial thing to observe there is that what we're witnessing is the relinquishment of all the journalistic standards and the academic standards and the standards of self-awareness and self-criticism that have ensured previous generations of institutional integrity, right? I mean, that's so if life outside the institutions is going to actually improve the institutions, if the criticism coming from a podcast is actually going to matter and should matter, it's only because the people running that podcast are using standards of intellectual integrity that are self-correcting, that are reliably producing a fact-based discussion. And so much of that, so much is wrong with social media and alternative media at this point, and it's frankly terrifying to see how much of our worldview is now anchored, and how much of our political process, and our efforts to govern ourselves, is now anchored to a style of conversation that has just kicked itself loose from the world.
I have this theory that basically the era of romanticism never ended. And the
era of what?
Romanticism, right?
Yeah.
Romanticism is this rebellion against Enlightenment principles, that the inner light of feelings is the only real illumination of the world, and that passions are more important than reason or arguments, and that it's sort of the tyranny of feelings in a lot of ways. And we have, for one of the reasons why, one of the sources of this cultural autoimmune disease, I think we have, is that we have pedagogically taught a couple of different generations now that to go with their gut, to go with their instincts, stay true to yourself. The highest source of moral authority are your feelings, and this contravenes everything we know about like how to be a good parent. Like a good parent doesn't say, hey, look, you got to be true to yourself. You got to go with your feelings. You got to go with your passion, follow your instincts. So you go run with those scissors, right?
Do your own research.
Yeah. Do your own research, right? I mean, like the tendency to say that intensity of feelings is more important than the power of facts and reason is just replete across. It suffuses so much of the culture. I mean, to get back to Harari's point, I mean, like the argument from a lot of people on the right after Mar-a-Lago was raided was that, well, now that Trump has been victimized by the government, we should just cancel the primaries and nominate him because all these people were saying, now I have to support Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And the logical connection there is baffling to me. It's like, there are lots of people who've been victimized by the government. That doesn't automatically, and unfairly, I don't think Trump was unfairly treated by the government per se, at least not with regards to the Mar-a-Lago stuff. That doesn't mean they should be president. That doesn't mean that they, are somehow, that cancels out any other consideration. But there is this primacy of feelings and victimization. The right has as much of a victimization complex as big chunks of the left does. And there is this twisted thing in our culture, which you might argue comes in part from Christianity. I'm agnostic about this, that wants to elevate victims as the highest source of moral good. It's sort of like the speak truth to power thing, that somehow there's virtue in being powerless. There might be. There might also not be. It depends on, who we're actually talking about. But in time and again, once you start listening for it, the tendency in our culture and our politics for people to say things like my personal truth, or I don't care what your argument is, that's how I feel, seems to predominate, including in a lot of institutions that should know better.
Yeah. Well, much of what you just described about Trump and Trumpistan is symptomatic of it being a personality cult. I mean, the wreckage of the Republican Party is now discernible in this this cult-like phenomenon of it's not just it's not normal politics. I mean, there are other examples of this, but he's a proper demagogue who's functioning by a different kind of political and reputational physics than we're used to in our politics. I mean, when he can say to his fans, I could shoot someone in Times Square and I wouldn't lose a single vote, right? I mean, what's amazing is that, one, that's basically true, right? I mean, he's honestly representing the nature of his situation, but he's doing it in a way that is explicitly um, denigrating the people who support him. It's like, you people are so fanatical, you're so unmoored ethically, that I could fucking do anything right now and you'd still love me, right? Like, that's the brag, the boast is not complimentary to his supporters, and it's nonetheless true. But the thing is, they support him by these cultic dynamics such that they're happy to eat all of that. They celebrate all of that. There's a kind of masochistic bonding to him, right? Like, he can't actually degrade them successfully, right? He can call them, stupid. He can call them, like, I love the poorly educated. Like, the poorly educated in his audience didn't say, God, that didn't feel good when he called us poorly educated. No, it's like they laughed as much as anyone at that, right? There's a different kind of bonding to him as a character. And we might speak about what has made that possible in American politics, and, what deformity in our culture, we might want to correct for the future. But there's it's not normal, right? And I think, what many of us hunger for is for the pendulum to swing back to something that's recognizably normal, so that you can have I'm traditionally, I've been left of center on virtually every relevant question, and I've never voted Republican in my life. But I mean, honestly, at this, I would campaign for Mitt Romney at this point. I mean, the relief I would feel for a Mitt Romney or a Liz Cheney to be the nominee. I mean, honestly, it's not an exaggeration. I would, given my allergy to what has happened on the far left, I would campaign for either of those people. And certainly in Cheney's case, given her religious commitments, our politics does not overlap. But it's just, there is a vast difference between Republicans of that sort and what is happening under Trumpism.